Hello and welcome once again to AP World History. This is class number 8. My name is Jason Epand, and let's go, since we have so much to talk about, let's go immediately to the questions I asked at the end of last class. I asked, number 1, how does Taoism contrast with Confucianism? I mentioned before, Confucianism is like the daytime social and political order. Be active, be ambitious, try to assist the greater community. People are benevolent and good by nature, and thus their actions will contribute to society, not take away from society. Taoism, nighttime. Introspection, reflection. Wu-wei, W-U-W-E-I, the idea of being disinclined to get involved in the engagements of the world and of society. Also because the Tao is so passive and yielding that it accomplishes everything by doing nothing. Confucianists are all about doing something. Study hard so that you can do very well on the test and perhaps become a part of government. Okay? So Confucianism and Taoism, very different from one another. But both will end up merging with one of the, the major religion that we're going to be discussing in this class today, Buddhism. Second question. How did the uneven distribution of wealth contribute to the collapse of the Han? Remember I spoke about how the Han Dynasty was very concerned about expansion and going out and conquering other lands. That costs money, a lot of money. And thus, when the emperor needs more money, he's going to take it from the people who have it, and that's the wealthy. He's going to take it in form of taxes, going to take it in form of land. The wealthy, they're not going to want to be abused. They're going to abuse someone who's lower than them. They abuse the majority of people, who are the peasants. They take away the peasants' land. They take away some of the peasants' earnings and make their life harder. Okay? Thus, we have a great deal of inequity here. Because the peasants, and this is by far the majority of people, they're not living they're not living well. They want to be living better. They could be living better if policies were changed. And this obviously is going to lead to a great deal of acrimony between the majority and those with power. We have the Yellow Turban Uprising, the peasants. We have the attempt by the socialist emperor Wang Mang to make things a little bit better. Unfortunately, it doesn't get better, and the Han Dynasty will fall apart because of it. All right, that gives you a basic breakdown of the two questions. Again, when I'm asking these questions and providing you with the answer, I'm not teaching you in terms of how to write an essay. We're going to get to that in the third part of this course, which is the essay section. Okay? Rather, when I ask these questions, they more serve to just remind you and keep all of these ideas very fresh in your mind. That's the idea. Keep everything very fresh so that your neurons inside of the brain are connecting all of these people, places, and things. It creates a stronger mind and a stronger, you could say, spirit to combat those nasty test makers when you receive your AP exam. Anyway, so now let's get to the point of today's class. And the point of today's class, of course, as I mentioned before, is we're going to start with Buddhism. Early Buddhism, obviously, we have to go back to Mr. Siddhartha Gautama. Siddhartha, S-I-D-D-H-A-R-T-H-A. Gautama is G-A-U-T-A-M-A, who was around from 563 to 483 BCE. He became the Buddha. Okay, he was from a middle class to upper middle class family. He had, or even better than that, upper middle class probably. Okay, his family had, and I'm using the term upper middle class, you know, relative to whatever it was back in those times in India, which is, goodness gracious, that's even before Alexander the Great got there. Anyways, as I was saying, Siddhartha gave up his comfortable existence in order to search for the cause of suffering, and so he retreated and became a bit of a monk. And he received his great deal of enlightenment under the Bo tree, B-O tree. And then he started talking to people about why human beings suffer so much. And he first started preaching somewhere around 528 BCE when he was about 35 years old at the deer park at the deer path at deer park of Sarnath. Excuse me, the deer park of Sarnath, S-A-R-N-A-T-H is where he started preaching. Okay. Eventually, obviously, he's a good enough orator in which he begins to get followers. Followers begin to organize themselves into communities of monks. The Buddhist doctrine is very similar to something I explained last class, which came obviously after the origin of the Buddhist doctrine, which is the idea of the Dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A, the Dharma. Okay. Part of the Dharma are the Four Noble Truths, or sometimes they're called the Noble Eightfold Path. And if you follow these Four Noble Truths, you will end, according to Buddhists, your suffering, your own individual internal suffering, will cease to exist. Why? Because according to the Four Noble Truths, the reason why people suffer is because they desire too much. Desire is the cause of suffering. And desire comes from having a great deal of passions. And thus what the Four Noble Truths teach you is to minimize those passions so that your desire also decreases. And this is going to create less acrimony, less friction within the soul. The religious goal is a personal salvation, or nirvana. All right? And this is a state of perfect spiritual independence. I want to stress something very important too, because I see this question asked often in different manifestations. You must know the difference between the Hindu idea of nirvana and the moksha, and also the Buddhist, and the difference between the two. Okay, the difference, salvation was the word I was looking for. What is the difference between Hindu salvation and Buddhist salvation? Hindu salvation, your soul is joining the universal soul. Your soul is joining the Brahman, B-R-A-H-M-A-N. Whereas in Buddhism, your soul is becoming spiritually independent by itself. Okay, that's the big difference, and that's nirvana. Okay, so you must know the difference of what happens to the souls in Hinduism and Buddhism. Hinduism, collective, universal soul. Buddhism, spiritual independence. Why would Buddhism appeal? Very similar to the way that why Jainism would be appealing. Because Buddhism does not accept, nor does it abide by, the caste system. The caste system has absolutely no purpose in Buddhism. Buddhism does not recognize the social hierarchies of castes and of jati. Another reason why Buddhism was so appealing is because it's not nearly as demanding as Jainism. All right? Buddhists do advocate living simply, but I don't think they're as hardcore ahimsaites as Jainists are. Buddhism also tended to use vernacular tongues. When I use the word vernacular, V-E-R-N-A-C-U-L-A-R, vernacular refers to whatever language people in a community are speaking, that is a language upon which the Buddhist religion will take in that community. That's using the vernacular tongue, or the sort of common everyday tongue. Buddhism is not just using Sanskrit, S-A-N-S-K-R-I-T, which remember is the holy language of the Aryans, which is later used in terms of Hinduism. All right, so they're using both Sanskrit and also the vernacular tongue. Okay, Buddhism is also in favor of creating holy sites. Holy sites, like this Deer Park or Sarnath becomes a holy site, as other things do. And pilgrimages go out there and visit these holy sites as if to become closer to the original spirits who were there. Okay? Also, Buddhism is very keen at forming solid monastic organizations. And these monastic organizations, as we see in Buddhism and later on in Western Christianity, are very good at being this conduit of religion, of beneficence. B-E-N-E-F-I-C-I-E-N-C-E, beneficence, or providing a good to the people in the community. And that's what these monastic organizations do. They provide social services. And these social services obviously are key in impressing people that, Buddhism, we're humanistic, we're thinking of you, so maybe you should be one of us. That type of idea. Also, as you probably figured out by now, Ashoka. Ashoka was probably the most famous Buddhist emperor during this time. He advocated Buddhism, was tolerant of everyone's religion, everyone's thoughts, but he himself was a Buddhist. He himself advocated the Dharma, as we spoke about before, on his laws written on rocks and pillars, etc., etc. Ashoka, the most important patron of Buddhism. Buddhism is going to go through a bit of a transition. It's going to go through a bit of a transition in between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE. That transition is called Mahayana Buddhism, M-A-H-A-Y-A-N-A Buddhism. Okay? Early Buddhism places a great demand upon individuals, but later on Mahayana Buddhism begins to loosen up some of the dictums and also provides a good deal of, you could say, other attractive elements to the religion so that people are further drawn in by Buddhism. What are some of these aspects? First of all, Buddha becomes a god. Buddha wasn't a god before, maybe a prophet, but now in Mahayana Buddhism, as that has established itself in South Asia, in India, Buddha is now a god. Also, we have the creation of the Bodhisattva, B-O-D-D-H-I-S-T-A-V-A, Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva's nickname is, I guess it kind of means an enlightened being. But really what a Bodhisattva is sort of the conduit for a soul on earth, like you or me. And when a bodhisattva appears, that's good news, because that means your soul is going to be liberated, permanently liberated from your body, no more reincarnation, permanently liberated by your body, and will now attain nirvana. Bodhisattva is your guide to nirvana and spiritual independence. I always remember this from a Steely Dan song. Steely Dan is was this popular American rock band in the 1970s with esoteric, strange, quirky, little strange lyrics and little jazzy, funky rhythms and stuff like that. You probably hear some of their songs on classic rock and don't even realize it's them. Anyways, they have a song by the name of Bodhisattva, and as a special treat, I will sing the chorus, but this is quite embarrassing, so forgive me. It goes, Bodhisattva, won't you take me by the hand? And it's like a little jazzing. Dun, 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 dun. Bodhisattva, won't you take me by the hand? And listen to that. Won't you take me by the hand? As if you want to receive the Bodhisattva. I think you understand it now. Okay, anyways, another reason why Buddhism is sort of loosening up as a dictum is that monastic organizations are beginning to form alliances with wealthy individuals. Wealthy individuals start giving some of their money to in terms of gold, and maybe if you go down to Southeast Asia, you see the sheer amount of golden temples there. It's like a Disneyland for golden temples. Some of these relationships start being created during this time, where the wealthy are beginning to get in with Buddhism. Kind of strange things. Okay? Also, during this time, Mahayana Buddhism, certain educational institutes are created in order to provide as the home or as the apprentice study ground for students. And one famous one is called Nalanda, capital N-A-L-A-N-D-A. Nalanda. And that's Buddhism. And Buddhism will continue to be popular in South Asia for this particular period of time. We'll get to how it spreads later and why it goes down. But the reason why Hinduism is still so firmly entrenched in South Asia, despite the popularity of these other trained schools of thought, is because, remember the caste system, firmly ingrained. But also, Hinduism, I guess somebody within Hinduism is making the decision to create certain cultural literary icons of that medium, of the reading medium, and attach them to Hinduism. What do I mean by this? Okay, there were certain poems. A very famous one is called Mahabharata, M-A-H-A-B-H-A-R-A-T-A, the Mahabharata. It was a secular poem, but then it was revised by the Brahmin, the priests, to honor the god Vishnu. Vishnu, V-I-S-H-N-U. Vishnu is the preserver of the world. That's just one example. Another famous example is the Ramayana. Ramayana may be the most famous, you would say, originally it was a secular epic love poem between Rama, R-A-M-A, and Sita, S-I-T-A. And Ramayana, during this classical era, is now turned into a Hindu story. Whereas previously it was secular without any type of organized religion ties, now it's becoming plain out Hindu. Probably the most important, the most famous classical Hindu tale that's really capturing the imagination of the people and, and obviously warming their hearts towards this organized religion is the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, capital B-H-A-G-A-V-A-D, Gita, G-I-T-A. And what it is, it's not very long. It's a short poetic work between Vishnu and a warrior. And it's basically this dialogue. And what it talks about are the expectations of Hinduism and the potential for salvation. The famous Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita. All right? Over a period of time, Hinduism is very much going to eclipse Buddhism and Jainism as the dominant religious strain of the majority of people in South Asia. And we will get to why that is and how that is at a later point. But this takes us to the end of chapter 9. And thus now we are going to chapter 10 and see how much we can get done with Greece. Greece. Yes. Gyro, gyro, and all the souvlaki and all the other Greek food that's A lot of it, I can't, I just don't remember right now. Anyways, okay, let's start with Greece. The foundation of Greek society was on an island by the name of Crete, C-R-E-T-E. The reason why a great deal of sort of very, very early Greek society developed on Crete was because that ships that were going in between Egypt and Mesopotamia and Italy and North Africa, Crete was just the natural stopping place, and it was also the way that the winds blew. You just naturally found yourself landed on Crete. So certain societies begin to grow on Crete. And the first major one was the Minoan society, M-I-N-O-A-N, the Minoan society named after King Minos, who maybe you've heard of, who is in mythology, the half-man, half-bull ruler. Okay? In terms of Minoan society, basically they're kicking it in between 2200 and 1400 BCE. And it was really the center of Mediterranean commerce during this time because of its strategic positioning. Okay? Minoans were again influenced, we would say, by Egypt and also by Phoenicia. Remember the Phoenicians, those people in the broader elements of Mesopotamian society, very influential to the Greek alphabet. And even here, they are influential to the Minoan alphabet, which is called Linear A. Linear, L-I-N-E-A-R-A. Linear A, to this day, is untranslated. It's untranslated, so we have no idea what it means, I guess, or maybe some very few people maybe know a little bit. Anyways, what else? Minoans. Minoans are also known for, women played a very active role in Minoan society as priestesses, etc. They're known for their red frescoes. Those people who have taken AP art history may have seen, often on a test they'll be something about red frescoes. You see a picture of something and it's Minoan with like these, crazy looking girls kind of having a good time, kind of looking like a joyous Medusa or something, because their hair sometimes looks like curly snakes. Anyways, that's Minoan, all right? Minoan society. Minoan society is not militaristic, nor is it into conquests, so they will be taken over. They will be conquested. In 1100 BCE, they are sort of taken over. They do fall under foreign domination. And the people who are now in charge are the Myceneans, capital M-Y-C-E-N-A-E-A-N. And it's named after their city, Mycenae. Mycenae. The Myceneans are originally Indo-Europeans. They settle in sort of the Greek peninsula somewhere around 2000 BCE, and over time, because they are much more of a militaristic society, they get stronger and eventually they overtake the Minoans on Crete. The Mycenean language is Linear B. Linear B, also untranslated. So as you can tell, Linear B influenced by the Minoans, Linear A. Because of the fact that the Myceneans were more militaristic, they're known for different things. They're known for building these stone fortresses in southern Greece. And southern Greece is a little bit known as the Peloponnesian. That becomes a word we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay? But they're known for their stone fortresses, and what purpose do they serve? Obviously to protect the community, but more importantly, the agricultural settlements, because food is still the most precious commodity. Okay? For a period of time, Mycenae, they were, I should say not Mycenae, but Myceneans were successfully expanded even into places like Anatolia, Sicily, and Italy. Remember, Anatolia being the majority of Turkey, modern-day Turkey, but not Istanbul, not the areas furthest to the west. Okay? Sometime after 1200 BCE, I should say right around 1200 BCE, the Mediterranean world falls into a bit of chaos because of the Trojan War. Troy was a city on the northern end of the Aegean, or kind of in the, you would say it's in far western Turkey, and obviously there's a big Trojan War. You really don't have to know much about Achilles and Paris and people like that, but just be aware the Trojan War does cause chaos around there. Okay? Now, eventually, what happens is let's not eventually, but let's go to Greece, okay? And the world of the polis, all right? Polis or polis, P-O-L-I-S. That is what the Greek society is built on. And P-O-L-I-S refers to city-state. Greece is a nation of city-states, okay? Or actually, the entirety of Greece is known for their city-states. Just like Mesopotamia is known for its city-states, same thing with Greece, known for its city-states. In terms of Greece, most individuals either come from one or two backgrounds. It's either the Dorian background, D-O-R-I-A-N, and Dorian stands for most of the Greek peninsula, or the Ionian background. Ionian, capital I-O-N-I-A-N, which is in Attica and a variety of other sort of regions in Greece. Okay, Ionian, I believe, is Athens, and Dorian, I believe, would refer to Spartans. And those are the two major cities we're going to discuss right now. First, let's talk about Sparta. Sparta. I went to a high school in which my mascot were the Spartans. How about that? Anyways, Sparta begins to extend control during the 8th and 7th centuries in its area in the southern Peloponnesus. Okay. Now, the way that they established control is that they conquered other people in other lands, and what they would do is they would reduce these people sort of to the status of something called helots, H-E-L-O-T-S. The closest thing to a helot in other parts of world history are serfs, S-E-R-F-S. Serfs obviously come from feudalist society, okay? Helots. Helots were what the conquered people were reduced to after Sparta sort of take them over, okay? These semi-free servants who were sort of a bit tied to the land and obviously working for the Spartans, okay? Sparta, as we know, as I'm sure you know, heavily militaristic, heavily militaristic. But let's talk about some of the other aspects of Spartan society. First of all, they very much discourage social distinction. They don't want to place certain people above other people, and thus they are much more of an egalitarian society than Athens. Much more egalitarian. And this also works its way to gender relations in women. Women often receive the same amount of physical education that men would receive. The idea is that women who were weak would produce weak sons, and thus women should be as much of a warrior as the man is, sort of similar to what certain American patriots advocated with the idea of republican motherhood. Okay, they get this originally from Sparta. Distinction is thus not by rank, it's more done by your skills, by your prowess, and by your discipline. Just certain skills, and measuring those skills would be very important to society. Sparta was a stable society, but a bit of a dull society. It's a bit old-fashioned, and it's very rugged. It's very ascetic. They are very much advocate a simple way of life, living life simply, not one of luxury, and keeping yourself very, very disciplined. Okay, so that's Sparta. What about our friends Athens? Athens is always a city that we like to talk about the most, maybe because there's lots and lots of action going on there. Okay? Athens, which is located on Attica, eventually, the way that it worked at Attica, because there were lots of different smaller, you would say, ethnic minorities, there was a man by the name of Solon. I'm really consolidating information, obviously, because on the AP test, you don't have to know a great, to go into great depth. But there was a man by the name of Solon, S-O-L-O-N. Again, I apologize for my pronunciation. Solon very much was the man responsible for broadening the base of political participation, leading to the idea, a certain idea of democracy and sort of the idea of citizens, and he's very much the father of these democratic principles. Okay? Citizenship. Citizenship is only, however, and it's always a however when it comes to citizenship always, until we get to the 20th century, it's citizenship always restricted to some. And here, citizenship is restricted to free adult males. Free adult males. If you're a slave adult male, sorry, you're not a citizen, of course. All right? Also, foreigners, you can't be a citizen. Slaves, obviously, just said you can't be a citizen. And women, I'm sorry, you cannot be a citizen as well of Athens. All right? In terms of their economy, Athens is very much a maritime society. M-A-R-I-T-I-M is in Michael, E society, which means they're a society run by boats, the Navy, and naval ships, stuff like that. All right? It's all about trade. All about trade. All right? It brought about a great deal of prosperity to Attica and is the reason why things go well. The ones who benefit from the trade, unfortunately, its society is not nearly as egalitarian as Sparta. The aristocratic landowners are the primary beneficiaries of this thing. And what you have in Athens is going to be a large slave class, which we will talk about a little bit later. And in the 6th century BCE, class tension begins to rise. One other figure I should mention really quick about democracy, of course, is Pericles. P-E-R-I-C-L-E-S. Pericles, who ruled from 443 to 429 BCE, is also known very much as a man of democracy, which is true. But one thing I should say is that Pericles may have been, and I know other leaders were, tyrants. during that day, the idea of having a tyrant as a leader was very, very normal. Today we hear the word tyrant and tyrannical, and we think maybe, you know, like, you know, the dark force of the Empire in Star Wars, you know, that music. But anyways, but back then, tyrants were often elected officials. What tyrants would do is that they would consolidate power from aristocrats. Aristocrats arguing amongst themselves, tyrants would consolidate that power in order to make society a little bit more organized. So often tyrants are both elected and even popular because they are allowing for society to progress instead of the sort of the malaise of, you know, when different groups are always fighting for power. Okay? In terms of Greece and the larger world, Greece, as we know, if you're a student of history, you know that the Greeks have had an enormous influence on many, many, many societies. And maybe it doesn't come as a shock to you that during its height, Greece had more than 400 colonies. All right. Obviously, when you have so many colonies, this provides for a great deal of facilitation for culture, for trade, etc., etc. Okay? The language is spreading everywhere, and it will continue to do so. We'll mention this again and again. Okay? However, when you form so many colonies and when you become strong, this is going to lead to a certain amount of conflict. All right? I mentioned in Chapter 7 a little bit about the Persian War. The Persian War, I'm going to go into more detail about it right now. The Persian War was in between 500 and 479 BCE. What happened was that the Greek colonies on the Ionian coast, so remember we're talking about Athens, start revolting against Persia. Okay? And then what we have are a series of famous, the ones that are most famous, the series of altercations between Athens and Persia. Two ones I want to mention in particular. The first is called the Battle of Marathon. Marathon, like the 26 miles. In 490 BCE, it's a decisive victory for Athens, as is this Battle of Salamis, S-A-L-A-M-I-S. The Battle of Salamis was when the Persian navy loses a great battle against Athens in 480 BCE, and this is basically, it was Persia's last chance to conquer or to take over Athens or for final victory. And it failed. So the Persia had to retreat back to Anatolia and its area in the world. Many people may have seen the movie 300. 300 also takes place obviously during the Persian War. I don't remember if the lead character, the Gerard Butler's character, was Leonidas, L-E-O-N-I-D-A-S. But Leonidas was a very famous king and who led his people, very brave, small group of people, Spartans, and they had a great deal of victories until they reached an area called Thermopylae, T-H-E-R-M-O-P-Y-L-A-E. And it was there that the Persians were assisted by a traitorous Greek, the ugly hunchback in the movie, and who ended up flanking King Leonidas and his people by going through the mountains during a particular path. And that was the end of those 300 people in the battle. Okay? So, at the end of the Persian War, okay, you're thinking, great, Athens won, Greece is going to be one big happy place, let the good times roll. Well, kind of for a little bit. You see, the way that the Greek city-states would communicate with each other and make sure that they were on the same page as they battled a mutual enemy was through something called the Delian League. The Delian League was not just for military things, but was also for, you know, economic and social, to facilitate the economic and social relationships between the Greek polis, okay? Delian League, D-E-L-I-A-N. Okay, the Delian League, again, representatives from all of the Greek polises, all the Greek city-states. Unfortunately, after a while, Athens begins to dominate the Delian League. Athens has by far the strongest navy, and it uses it to exploit its situation, and it uses it to exploit it for its benefit. Obviously, then, other city-states were going to begin to be insulted. They begin to go away from the Delian League, and Athens is left to influence this Delian League by itself. Okay? Obviously now, if the Delian League is failing and the Greek city-states are no longer socially meeting in a friendly way, then what's going to happen? People are going to want to fight each other. There's going to be acrimony, there's going to be conflict. And this climaxed, of course, with the Peloponnesian War, P-E-L-O-P-O-N-N-E-S-I-A-N War, which happened in between 431 and 404 BCE. The The Peloponnesian War is in between Athens and Sparta, the two great Greek city-states. And who wins? Sparta. Sparta wins 404 BCE. Sparta wins. They're the militaristic society. And with them winning, though, it's going to basically, because Athens was the greatest of the societies, Greek society had reached its peak. And that's the Peloponnesian War. Over the next 60, 70 years, Greece sort of trudges on without ever getting back to its glory that it had in the 5th century BCE. Okay, so that in the middle of the 300s of BCE, a new area of strength began to emerge, and this was in Macedonia, Macedonia. Macedonia is a frontier state north of peninsular Greece, and a man by the name of Phillip of Macedon, who ruled for 23 years in between 359 and 336 BCE, brought Greece under his control. He was assassinated and his son took over. What's his son's name? I bet you can figure it out. Alexander. Alexander of Macedon, Alexander the Great. And at the age of 20, he begins his conquest of the world. By 331 BCE, he controls Syria, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. In that very same year, he invades Persia, destroys its capital, Persepolis, and dominates and takes it over. By 327 BCE, he had even crossed the Indus River. Now he's located in India proper. But unfortunately for Alexander, his army refused to go any farther. They were sick of marching. They had been marching for, God knows, 15 years. They wanted to go back home to their families. And so Alexander's dreams of making it to China, etc., were lost at that particular thing. And Alexander was going to die 4 years later in 323 BCE of, God only knows the cause. Some people say malaria. Some people say it was a sexually transmitted disease. We're not exactly, like syphilis. We're not exactly sure. But he is dead. But with him dying, what's going to happen to all this land? This land was taken over by Macedonia. Macedonia has control. No other empire or dynasties exist around here. It's all Macedonian land. How now are these societies going to form their own sovereignty? How are states going to form their own sovereignty? What's going to happen? Who's going to fill the political vacuum that has been left by Alexander's death and also the sort of, the outward matriculation of the Macedonian army? And those questions we're going to answer next class. But for now, I want to give you a couple of questions for homework. This is from chapter 9. Number 1, in what ways did trade and manufacturing affect the caste system? And number 2, how did early Buddhism evolve into Mahayana Buddhism? And how did it help spread the religion? In what ways did trade and manufacturing affect the caste system? And how did early Buddhism evolve into Mahayana Buddhism? And how did it help spread the religion? Again, my name is Jason. Thank you very much for listening. And I look forward to the next class, class number 9, in which we will finish discussing Greece, etc., etc. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.